Welcome to Transportation Chain, a series focused on how current events are impacting transportation, trucking, and supply chain management. My name is Marina Mayer, Editor-in-Chief of Food Logistics and Supply and Demand Chain Executive, and I will be your host for this episode. Our series opens with a look at workforce development in the trucking and transportation industry, and how companies need to implement the right programs in place to hire, train, and retrain employees for tomorrow's challenges and opportunities. Next, we'll hear from Kurt Bennick, Senior Editor of Equipment Today, to discuss how difficult it has been for new drivers to enter the market with training and CDL testing. We'll also hear from Sarah Jensen, Editor of OEM Off-Highway, and Becky Schultz, Editor of Equipment Today, who will take on a broader look at the labor-related issues the manufacturing and construction sectors are facing as the U.S. economy begins to recover and workforce opportunities become more available. But first, let's drive forward to learn more about key supply chain roles in trucking and transportation, what companies are doing to upskill and reskill employees, and what the future of the job market looks like in a post-pandemic environment. When it comes to workforce development in the freight and transportation industry, one thing is clear. A pandemic such as COVID-19 presents a host of challenges for both veteran supply chain execs and newcomers to the industry. For one thing, COVID-19 forced a lot of companies to fast-track technology introductions, developments that even the most seasoned employee had to learn how to operate, manage, and deploy. A UiPath survey uncovered that nearly half of office workers worry they will be out of a job within 5 years because their skills will be outdated. Because of this, 86% of respondents wished their employer offered opportunities to acquire new skills, while 83% wished their employer provided more opportunities to enhance their current skills.
8,500 warehousing jobs were created as a result of this COVID epidemic, essentially a redeployment. That's how we see this, is a redeployment of resources to different aspects within the economy. It's not necessarily a loss, but it's something that does create additional considerations in terms of worker safety. How do you shore up on that to manage demand when you're asking more people to come into a confined space?
A survey released from the Association for Supply Chain Management reveals that 88% of respondents have a positive outlook on their supply chain careers, and 85% would recommend working in supply chain to those in other industries. Supply chain professionals with a bachelor's degree reported a median salary of over $78,000 a year, which was 24% higher than the national median salary. 91% of respondents reported receiving additional compensation like bonuses and profit sharing. 79% of respondents reported being satisfied with the quality of their benefits. And for the second year in a row, respondents under 30 years of age reported the same median salary regardless of their gender. Those who have held at least one APIC certification reported a 21% higher median salary than those without a certification. But when it comes to applying to key supply chain roles, Alan Jagnandan from LaSalle Network recommends job seekers emphasize their skill sets, credentials, and achievements on their resume.
When we're talking about experienced talent, specifically within supply chain, the ERP system that is most prevalent is SAP. And so individuals that bring the SAP ERP experience to the table traditionally have a leg up unless an organization is on an Oracle or JDA type of an ERP system. The one that's universal is Excel, advanced Excel skills. We see that with just about every hiring manager that we communicate with coast to coast. Is we talk about their top 3 must-haves, if you will. And Excel is always one of those 3 when it comes to finance and accounting and your supply chain professional. Longevity, career advancement, of course. I think it's important, and I always like to note this when we're giving advice to our candidates, is to put achievements on the actual resume. What types of cost savings did you provide the company that you were working for? Make it very tangible so it jumps out at the prospective hiring manager or organization that you're submitting your resume to.
Today's supply chain teams should also be looking for experienced professionals in strategic sourcing, as this particular field has started to pick up steam over the last 18 months.
But strategic sourcing has really picked up steam and momentum over the past 3 or 4 years. And so it goes back to, and these are really longer term types of solutions. And working with your vendors as partners, you're working to just try and maximize the cost savings for said organization. And so strategic sourcing I think will continue to be an area of emphasis for companies. The other area that we've really seen, probably over the last 5 or 6 years now, is specifically demand planning. And so this goes back to what I initially touched on. When leaders are putting together their forecast to ensure they have the right amount of inventory or supply on hand for peak season or just the ebbs and flows of the fiscal year. In years past, salespeople can go out and say, well, I'm going to sell this much inventory to, this big box retailer. And if there's no checks and balances, what you'd end up having was surplus. I mean, it's waste at the end of the day. But if you're a salesperson, you don't want to be stuck in a position where you've under forecasted and then therefore you don't have enough inventory to actually deliver to your customer, because that could lead to another competitor in that same category inching their way into your shelf space, for example. And I know a lot of it has shifted to e-commerce as well. But, obviously, if you have to sit there and wait for 3-4 months for a specific product, or even a couple of weeks or a couple of days, if there's an alternative that's got a very similar price point, you want it that bad, you're probably going to go down that path and choose the alternative. And so this goes hand in hand with your question on where we've seen organizations beef up specific areas within supply chain, and that's the demand planning function. So demand planning works hand in hand with your sales organization to ensure the numbers do match up. They are forecasting XYZ, and we validated it through the analytics, the median, worst case scenario, best case scenario, to ensure that there's not too much waste or we don't actually have too little inventory to get to the customer.
From the standpoint of Bill Sullivan, Executive Vice President of Advocacy for American Trucking Associations, recruiting the younger generation is key to the future of trucking and transportation companies.
The easiest thing to do is find people at the beginning of their work life as they're starting to get a feel for what they want their life and career to be before some of the parts of that have solidified. And so when people who want to work hard are coming out of high school or coming out of vocational school and ask themselves what career they want to get into, they have options like plumber and welder and electrician and trades that may be a really solid salary. Right now, jobs within trucking are harder to introduce them to. So what we've seen is that private driving schools see people in their mid-30s coming into the truck driving industry. If we're losing men and women for 15 years at the beginning of their career, they're coming into trucking as a job of last resort and not building a career and a lifestyle. So hopefully we can also access younger talent who we can train safely and can ensure that we don't degrade safety, and we're comfortable that we can do that.
It's a fact. Without reskilling and upskilling opportunities, employees fear becoming obsolete. 1/3 of office workers fear their current roles will advance past their current skills, and 25% worry about losing their job due to automation. 58% of global respondents feel somewhat too strongly intimidated when they need to learn how to use a new technology. And in the United States alone, that number jumps to 68%. Surprisingly, the younger an office worker is, the more intimidated they are to learn how to use new technologies, with 43% of workers aged 18 to 23 years old saying they are intimidated to learn a new technology. Meanwhile, 80% of employees believe they will be more productive and satisfied at work through skills training, with 88% of workers saying they would be more willing to continue working at a company that offered upskilling and reskilling opportunities, according to the UiPath survey.
Because after the first series of challenges that the industry, and not just the industry, but all the communities faced with quarantining or closing areas down, and for the trucking industry, making sure that our workers were considered essential so that grocery stores still had groceries in them and hospitals still had medicine in them. Things were riding on trucks. We had to make sure the trucks could get through. But the second tier of problems that we had were largely about sort of training and workforce issues. And as state DMVs, state licensing agencies, and departments of motor vehicles were sending all their employees home working remotely, it put a real crimp in the pipeline that the trucking industry depends on. And, I think that it's easy to take a point in time and draw conclusions. But what's really true is that the average age of truck drivers, specifically truck drivers, and to a lesser but important extent, also technicians and support staff. But for truck drivers, the average driver age is in their mid-50s. And so we have an average driver age that is close to retirement all the time. So there's a lot of attrition in the roughly 3.5 million truck drivers in the country that has to be replenished constantly. And so when these state DMVs were shutting down, that replenishment pipeline for just the natural attrition that would come was shut off. The lag time of weeks and weeks of training employees and then the testing that goes into it was a real challenge that FMCSA worked with us and the state licensing agencies, made some minor adjustments to the ability for potentially third-party testing for not just skills testing, but also knowledge testing, both the driving test and the written test. Those are challenges that in a normal time can be a problem, sort of testing lags and licensing lags that mean that men and women who have trained to be truck drivers may leave the industry altogether if they can't get their license soon enough. So we perpetually fight that.
Pandemic or not, workforce development in the trucking and transportation industry is a real issue that requires the right programs in place to hire, train, and retrain employees for tomorrow's challenges and opportunities. In our next segment, Kurt Bennick, Senior Field Editor of Equipment Today, discusses how difficult it has been for new drivers to enter the market with training and CDL testing. Let's hear from Kurt now.
Hi, my name is Kurt Bennick. I'm Senior Editor with Equipment Today magazine. While the pandemic has temporarily put a dent on the driver shortage, it has created a unique set of challenges for those who want to earn the CDL certification. In many areas of the country, it is more difficult to find CDL instruction, and even scheduling testing times can pose more of a challenge in states where DOTs have placed restrictions to address the pandemic. Let's look at the situation leading up to the pandemic. The driver deficit swelled by more than 10,000 to 60,800 in 2018 from 2017, according to the American Trucking Associations. The shortage is most acute for long-haul drivers, where the average age is 46 and workers are on the road for weeks at a time. The ATA estimates that 160,000 driver positions will go unfilled in the next decade. Organizations and driver training schools were taking steps to address the challenge by offering incentive programs and even abbreviated driver training courses, such as the 2-day Class B CDL course developed by the Associated General Contractors of South Dakota and Southeast Tech in Sioux Falls. The goal was to provide an express program for obtaining a CDL. The program addresses the reality that there are a lot of drivers retiring and not many coming into the industry. While the pandemic has temporarily eased the driver shortage, it has also made it more difficult for new drivers to enter the market, with training and in some cases CDL testing becoming more of a challenge. To learn more, we talked to the Associated Training Services. Hi, this is Kurt Bennick, Senior Editor of Equipment Today and for ConstructionPros.com. And we're here with Jerry Kabaka of Associated Training Services. Jerry, can you tell me a little bit about what your company does?
Well, we have actually two school programs. We have ATS, which is heavy equipment and crane training. We have Diesel Truck Driver Training School, which is CDL training. This is a family company. Our father started it. Me and two brothers run it and have been running it by ourselves for about 40 years. We've been around since the early 60s, actually.
What was business like before the pandemic?
We probably started the year off as good as we've ever started our year off. Our ATS Heavy Equipment program trains students from all 50 states. Our CDL program, because of the number of CDL training providers available, is a much smaller geographic area, mostly Wisconsin.
Exactly how did the pandemic affect your business and how is it impacting training operations?
Well, we've cut back on certain areas and limited some of our classes to certain sizes because we're trying to maintain the required 6 feet per student, that sort of thing. Everybody's wearing face masks. In some respects, a lot of changes. The basic core goals of the business have not changed much. We're still advertising nationally for heavy equipment and very strong locally for CDL training.
Okay, and did you guys have to suspend operation for a while during the pandemic?
We actually did. The state of Wisconsin came down pretty strict on anybody who had any type of school or training program in mid-March. We actually closed the program down for the heavy equipment for 10 weeks. We are doing some CDL training now, mostly to clean up for the students that were interrupted by the shutdown. And we will be offering our full off-street CDL program limited to 16 students, which will be August 3rd. And given those class limits and the demand for our program in southern Wisconsin, we have actually filled our next 2 sessions completely full. And we're now enrolling people for late September.
The demand for training is still there.
Well, in CDL training, the demand is huge. 500,000 plus truck driving jobs in this country. And there's a certain amount of turnover in the long haul driving. And I think the demand is almost unfillable and has been there for many years. Shortage of drivers is a very serious problem. And a lot of that is driven by restrictions for drivers, health restrictions, driving record restrictions, drug screening. They've cleaned up the industry from the 50s and 60s, but they've also limited the number of people who even qualify to be a driver. It's a difficult job.
It is. It seems like the pipeline, I know, was kind of, I don't want to say it was broken before, but there were severe limits on the number of drivers versus the open seats that were available in the trucks. How is the interruption in training affecting that process? Is there going to be fewer drivers getting through the pipeline just because there's a bottleneck at the training?
I think that's a possibility. A lot of companies have taken up their own training programs because of the desperation for finding drivers. That's not new. That's been going around for probably the last 10 or 15 years easily. And the shortage of drivers probably started in the early 90s. So I don't think things have changed. It's just that there's more opportunity out there and more desperation for drivers. As a result, I think the drivers are treating better than they ever have been. And the pay is getting better than it ever has been, but it's probably still somewhat short. Not the treatment of the drivers, but the type of job limits a lot of people from participating. It's very few females, even though there's a lot of females participating in the occupation. It's such a demanding occupation time-wise and irregular time-wise when you're a long-haul driver, even a delivery driver. This is not a 9-to-5 job. This is a 9 until you get your loads delivered job. Mm-hmm. And if you're a single parent, that's almost impossible to deal with.
In terms of looking forward, what is a normal class size, and do you think you'll be able to get there at some point?
Well, right now we're limiting it to 16 students every 3 weeks, and we've had no trouble meeting that requirement. That's actually about 60% of our normal production. We are limiting that because of the class size, because of the way we operate the training. Every student here in CDL training is going to spend at least 2 hours a day on the road with an instructor by themselves. So we are not going to be able to put 3 in a truck or anything like that anymore. So those modifications have been pretty substantial changes in the way we offer the training. But I think in some respects, I believe this, we may come out of this, have a better training program than we had before. Not that the other one was bad before, it's just that we've made some changes, I think, that actually have improved the ability of the student to pick up and become a safe and more qualified driver.
The class that you're graduating now, if they had any problems scheduling CDL exams, because I know in some states, especially in Iowa, it's been hard and you've had to individually schedule appointments.
Wisconsin is a model state, and there's many states like Wisconsin. We have independent CDL examiners. Mm-hmm. So we have 2 examiners who are just self-employed individuals who contract with the state. They go through training and they're audited and they're monitored very closely by the State Department of Transportation. But that means there's more examiners available. If you had to go through the Department of Motor Vehicle office to get a test with a state examiner, it'd be jammed up. It would have been jammed up before. It'd be worse today. And I know some of the states, it's almost impossible. The waits are sometimes 2 and 3 weeks long to get an appointment.
And we've heard before that the pandemic has kind of eased the driver shortage temporarily, but do you see that just as a very temporary issue?
I see that as a temporary issue. There's some companies probably that have let some drivers go that are moving into these other companies. The occupation itself is quite huge. I mean, it's 2.5 to 3 million people. That's bigger than nursing. That's bigger than a lot of job skills that people have. So there's just an unmet need almost always in place. They say there's about 100,000 person shortage in drivers in this country. That has not even changed much in the last 15 years. That's kind of, with 2.5 million people in the occupation, you're probably always going to have a shortage of 60,000 or 100,000 people.
What is the average age of the students that you see coming through the school? Are you having a harder time with younger people, or is it more young people that come through?
The average age of the student here is probably in the 30 to 35 year group. I think it's people that have tried different trades and different types of jobs, maybe unskilled jobs, and have decided it's time for them to get into something that's solid, that's going to last them a lifetime. Well, we don't see many under 21, okay? We recommend everybody be 21. We screen everybody as far as health and driving record and that sort of thing.
Now, as we get out of the backside of the pandemic and things start to get more normal, where do you see the pipeline of drivers coming from?
Well, it's a hard thing to project. Mm-hmm. Okay, again, as I say, we have certain limits on drivers. When you take a dozen people that call us up that want to be truck drivers, probably number one is, do you meet the health requirements? 2 is your driving record. Number 3 is, then do you have all the money? Well, when you do that with the average 30-year-old person, you eliminate about 7 out of the 12 right off the bat. So it really is a numbers game, and you just need contacts and the interest. And we're very fortunate. We've been in business a long time. We're on a highway all by ourselves out here, just north of Madison. We have 10 or 12 cranes on the side of the road. We have 15 or 20 trucks out in the field. Everybody who drives north and south in Wisconsin has probably gone past our place. I mean, I go out of town in Iowa and Illinois and other places like that, and I'll say I'm with the Diesel Truck Driver Training School, and they go, oh, I've been by that place. So we're the only thing out here. We're surrounded by cornfields, and we're on a 4-lane main highway.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about the training school or about the current situation and how people can still get their CDLs?
No, I think that, we're a good school. We've been around for 50 or 60 years. My brothers and I have been running it for the last 40 or 50 years. Before that, our father was involved. Find a good school, get good training, and the job market is waiting for you. The ability of our students to find initial jobs or find jobs initially is pretty phenomenal. I mean, there's absolutely no reason why anybody we accept in our program doesn't get a decent job offer within a week or 2.
Thank you, Kurt. In our final segment, Sarah Jensen, editor of OEM Off-Highway, and Becky Schultz, editor of Equipment Today, take on a broader look at the labor-related issues impacting manufacturing and construction sectors as the U.S. economy begins to recover and workforce opportunities become more available. Becky and Sarah?
Workforce development challenges have been an issue in many of the heavy equipment and vehicle industries our publications cover for years, and the COVID-19 pandemic has further emphasized these challenges. A recent survey conducted by the Association of Equipment Manufacturers of high-level executives at the off-road equipment manufacturers found that employee health and well-being, lack of new orders, and continued supply chain challenges are some of the biggest issues they're currently facing as they reopen their facilities, and that the COVID-19 pandemic is taking its toll on the industry's workforce. More than 1/3 of respondents said they have furloughed up to half of their employees, while roughly 1 in 5 of respondents indicated that they have laid off as many as 10% of their workforce. The road to recovery is lined with warning signs, the survey went on to say, with equipment manufacturers who have furloughed workers. Nearly 1/3 of them said that they would not bring anyone back to work. And for those who have laid off workers, 8 out of 10 said that they will not rehire them based on current market conditions and challenges. So I don't know, Becky, what have you been hearing?
The construction industry was a little bit different than the manufacturing sector because of the essential designation for construction in a number of areas. So work continued throughout the COVID shutdown, albeit at a slower pace than what has typically been seen. And now we're starting to see that workforce demand slowly build back up as the economy has started to open up and construction projects have started to get their momentum back. But there's a lot of uncertainty about where the workforce that will do those jobs is going to come from. A quote from Patrick Ryan at the multinational construction consultancy firm Mindsight indicates that not all workers are coming back due to concerns over the risk of infection, competing responsibilities at home, and in some cases, their reliance on enhanced unemployment benefits under the CARES Act. He says the long-lasting impact of project delays due to pandemic shutdowns, as well as new safety regulations that limit the number of on-site personnel, will further reduce the pool of available workers. There is a big risk there that we will see the industry start to recover, but that the workforce will struggle to come back to where it was. We saw that after the Great Recession, where a number of workers ended up moving into other industries rather than coming back into construction due to the uncertainty. And then there's also the aging workforce. The average age of U.S. construction workers is somewhere between 45 to 55 years old. And due to COVID-19, obviously older workers are more susceptible. And so a percentage of these workers may choose to simply opt out, to time out and start their retirement early because of the situation. And that's going to take their skills out of the marketplace and exacerbate that skills gap that we've already been seeing prior to the pandemic. So there's a lot of challenges out there, certainly.
Yeah, we're hearing much the same. Retirement is also an issue for employees in the manufacturing sector, as is just attracting new, younger workers. I recently spoke with Julie Davis, Workforce Development Director at the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, who noted these issues, and play a brief clip of that interview now. So what are some of the biggest challenges AEM is seeing currently within the off-road equipment manufacturing industry?
So your timing of asking this question is perfect, because we actually, as an association, just spent our first quarter interviewing our members and asking them that very question. And so we worked with a third-party firm, and based on the research that we got back and the information, we know that our companies are struggling to fill jobs, and in some cases, the number of open positions is actually impeding company growth. Definitely struggling with some of those issues. Companies are really struggling with both, attracting employees and also keeping or retaining employees. And obviously the employment situation has changed over the past few months, as everything else has.
Right.
However, companies are still looking at a growing number of retirements as a challenge, higher turnover rates, especially with younger generations, where companies then become a little bit hesitant to invest in that initial training with those folks. Companies indicated that they're really still concerned with our kind of poor industry perception, high schools being focused on a college preparatory curriculum, and then kind of a stigma associated with trade jobs among parents, teachers, and counseling. That's kind of where things are sitting right now. What I will say is that we also know that schools are kind of changing their tone when it comes to looking at the value of trades education, especially as college debt has been rising. So that's a good thing.
You can watch that full interview at oemoffhighway.com.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is there's a need out there to demonstrate the opportunities that are available in the construction industry and change the perception of what that image is, to reinforce the brand as a career path that gives a lot of potential, a lot of growth opportunity. And it doesn't matter whether you're a laborer, a truck driver, a project manager, estimator. There's a lot of different levels out there that are available to those who are interested. I had a chance to speak with Greg Sizemore at the Associated Builders and Contractors, and he believes that changing the perception of what construction is and the type of work that's being done starts at a local rather than a national level. And I'd like to play a little clip from that interview with him.
Here's what I'm going to tell you. I believe if we're going to do any significant changes on the image of the construction industry, it's going to happen locally. It will not be anybody standing on a stump in Washington, D.C. or at some capital across America beating on their chest saying that it is, because there's always skeptics to this type of thing. The reality is this. Most work in America today that is done by the construction industry are done by contractors with less than 50 employees. In most cases, they're less than 25 employees.
Sure.
The truth of the matter is that's small business America. And that ought to mean something in the very backyard of every Mr. and Mrs. representative that may be out there representing a constituency. When I get the opportunity to talk to leadership around Washington, D.C. and across this country, if they're looking for me to solve the problem or have the answer, it's not going to happen. Let's take it back to our communities. Let's make sure we're having a conversation with the local PTA about why we don't have career technical education. Because you know what? We are small business America. We are pumping money into the economy. A successful contractor is making great money going into the economy. Where you stay in it, you pray in it, you play in it, whatever it may be, that's small business America. So I believe the ground game is local.
Obviously, looking at the industry, there needs to be an emphasis on the ability to move directly into a productive career, and without bringing on that college debt load that comes with a 4-year college education. For example, going back to the ABC, they offer an apprenticeship program through their network of 69 chapters, and it manages over 800 registered apprenticeship programs where students can come out of what Sizemore calls a positive net value proposition. Here's a quote from him. They have no college debt. They have nothing come out of this other than an education and the ability to pursue their career dreams. I think one of the other things that we're also seeing in the construction side is that due to the pandemic, development of the skill sets that are needed for this next level of construction workforce, we're going to see technology playing a much bigger role in the training needs and to get them to where they need to be. And I'd like to share a podcast clip from Stephanie Schmidt, president of Poole Anderson Construction in State College, Pennsylvania, where she talks about the workforce development issue and how technology plays into that.
We've always talked about how different types of individuals learn differently. You know, a lot of educators try to adapt to that, but in the construction industry for a long time have had kind of a one-size-fits-all type of educational environment. And I think this is now forcing us to look at ways to do training where, you know, on-site location is not the only way to be able to educate people. So I think that's one. I think what this has done is taken that down a level to the smaller and mid-sized contractors that maybe think certain technologies are out of their grasp just because of cost, that type of thing. And so there is focus now on bringing that technology, no matter what size your company is, whether you're a general contractor, trade contractor, or what. The COVID-19 pandemic has made people a lot more aware of the benefits of that. So I think there are some things like that that are getting companies and organizations to just take a deeper look at how can I be safer? How can I be more efficient? How can I have a trained workforce?
And I think workforce development is still, even though there are a lot of people that are out there and unemployed, there's an opportunity to perhaps attract those workers into the industry. It doesn't change the fact that there are a lot of people who don't have the necessary skill sets.
The quickest recovery possible from this is so important to our industry because we don't want to lose people to other industries, you know, such that happened in 2009, around that time frame. We already have such huge shortfalls in the construction industry as far as workforce that we don't want to make that any worse. We want to keep people excited about the industry, in the industry, and get them trained.
I'd also like to share what Greg Sizemore at ABC has to say on this topic as well.
Here's what COVID-19 has done. And this is, if you can find a bright bulb in the midst of all this, where we were traditionally sitting in classrooms of 30 or 40 students, we've now had to embrace technology and take all that education online. And you think about that from the standpoint, how quickly we had to take a right turn or a left turn where we had these big stick and brick facilities that we could not use for whatever reason. And now we had to take that online. And our education partners allowed us to do a lot of different things, very unique ways that we could host virtual classrooms, and we can actually do performance evaluations, looking at people through a computer monitor. So just by that one effect, technology has had a significant impact on the way we're distributing learning and how our learners are wanting to learn. And frankly, the younger generation coming into industry actually enjoys this better than going to a classroom after hours. And so we're seeing an uptick in people that are interested in their careers now going, hey, I can take this class online on my iPhone, on my iPad, or my desktop, whatever. I can do that. And so they can actually pursue their degree just like going to some online university right here virtually.
So clearly, technology is opening doors to building the next generation of workers. Sarah, are you seeing a similar type of movement in the manufacturing sector?
Yeah, we are. We're hearing that technology, it kind of is and will continue to play a role in especially helping overcome the skills gap and training. It's also playing in part into how manufacturers design their equipment. One of the big things is simplifying the operator cabs, kind of making them a little more similar to what somebody might have in their passenger car that they drive to and from work every day. So that helps to ease operation, which is important, especially as you're trying to get a younger workforce, or things like integrating joystick controls that are similar to game controls that many of them grew up on. That all is growing in the industry and ways that they're looking to help overcome that skills gap. There's also been a lot of discussion of the use of augmented reality and virtual reality technologies to help with training, which makes it a little easier and helps to reduce training time. I spoke with a company called GridRaster that mentioned that on the manufacturing side, there's a lot of requests for customization of parts. And so people need to be trained quickly on how to put together those parts, and mixed reality technologies like AR and VR can be really helpful with that.
And we're seeing that in the construction industry as well, where augmented reality and virtual reality tools are starting to be used, whether it's in training the workforce or being able to better visualize what's happening on a project. It's allowing for those skills gaps to be overcome in a way that perhaps even the online training is not able to accomplish. We're also seeing the advent of simulators to help in the training process. That's another technology that's becoming very prevalent. But also, the advent of artificial intelligence and automation in the vehicles that are allowing less skilled operators to be able to quickly come up to speed in terms of their utilization of that equipment. Many of the functions on machines are now no longer under the control of the operator. It's automatic. They don't have to think about it. And it allows them to focus on what they're doing with that job site task. So clearly there's a lot of technology that's going to help in getting that skills level up to where it needs to be. And I think, honestly, there's just that much more to come. So I think we just need to stay tuned.
Thank you for that, Becky and Sarah. That's it for this episode of Transportation Chain. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in for our next episode as we take an even deeper look at what's changed in the trucking, transportation, and supply chain industries since the beginning of the pandemic. Until next time, thank you.